Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of our questions and answers show. Today is, just grabbing my water, today is Friday, April the 26th. It's Avengers Endgame Day, right? If you guys are comic book fans, make sure you go out and catch the big climactic Avengers sequel today or this weekend. I'm actually going on Monday. Anyway, get back to music, right? So we got another edition of our new format on the Q&A show. I picked, 10 or 15 or so questions that I'm going to answer from all the questions that were submitted, which were about 100 of them. So if you haven't heard the answers to your questions, I didn't pick them. That probably means either it's something that's been asked for before, or if it might be something for a quick little, one-sentence answer, and I had a lot of those. I actually threw a couple in here today. Or maybe your question was kind of complex and vague, and I didn't get to it. But I picked the ones that I thought would be the most interesting to hear you guys have me answer, so we're going to do that. Also, to get back to the comic thing, Wild Bill and myself, who have the Comic Book Geezers YouTube channel, we did our inaugural questions and answers show over on that channel that just went live this morning. So if you're at all interested in comic books and you would like this format and you'd like to hear myself and my buddy Bill answering comic book questions from our loyal viewers, hop on over to Comic Book Geezers, check out that episode, make sure you subscribe. Hope you enjoy it like as much as you enjoyed this one. So let's get right down to it. So the first question we have today is from Alex L. Alex's question is, as a passionate viewer of all Q&A shows, I have to say this new format is much better. I kind of agree. Looking back 30 or so years, most of us agree that MTV or video format did more harm than good, which I kind of covered on the last Q&A show. Alex asks, what do you think about internet and music? Did the internet do more harm or good for music? Well, kind of two answers there. I think the internet has done a great job of exposing people to everything that's out there. Okay, there's literally no excuse for anybody to say, I don't know where to go to find music, or I have something I'm interested in checking out, but I don't know where to get it, right? I mean, there's no reason to ever hear that. I often have gotten in the past on these questions and answers show, I get people asking questions like, well, where did you find that CD? Where did it? People, just do a Google search. It is not hard to find anything you're looking for. It's one thing if you're looking for a CD or an LP or something and it's out of print, right? But there's other ways you can get stuff nowadays. Here lies the problem, okay? Because music is so easily found on the internet, so much of today's society assumes that it should always be for free or next to nothing. And that's the problem. Because music has been so devalued by the internet. Whereas in the old days, right, an artist, a band, or what have you would get paid to create music. Okay, they'd get an advance from the record labels. They'd get paid to make an album. They'd get paid to go out and tour. The labels would release the albums, and the artist would get a royalty based off of the sales, right? Doesn't really work that way anymore. In most cases, the majority of the bands that are out there aren't even on labels, so they're self-producing all this stuff. In most cases, they got to sell it themselves. So whether they're actually spending the money to print CDs or LPs, or whether they're selling digital downloads on, Bandcamp or whatever, or or they're taking their music and they're putting it up on streaming services, like iTunes or Spotify or iHeart or whatever it is. They get very little money from that. Very little money. So because people are used to, let's face it. If you're someone who doesn't like to own media, like physical copies of things, because it takes up room, and it does, you say, everything I need is available on Spotify. So what are you doing? You're paying like $10 a month to Spotify to have access to everything that's on Spotify as often as you want. A little bit different than going out and spending $10, $15 on a CD for each one that you want, right? Which is what I still do. So what is the artist really getting? Next to nothing. So it's really cheapened the art of producing albums, which is why a lot of kind of legacy bands now who have been around for a long time, they're like, why should we bother making albums anymore? We don't make any money on it. And most people are only interested in listening to the old stuff. So we're just going to, maybe every now and then we'll release some songs. But for the most part, we're just not going to make any new music because there's no money in it. We're just going to go out and tour ad nauseum. So I think while the internet has been great for allowing people to find whatever it is they're looking for, on the same token, it's really cheapened the art of making music to the point where people really don't want to pay for it anymore. And I'm sorry, but a musician, a band, a singer, what have you, they're just working people like us, all right? Everybody needs to get paid for the work they do, and making music is work. It's not easy. So if we've got some viewers of this channel who don't like to pay money for music, I'm sorry, but you're really doing a disservice to the people who are creating the music, and that's not your fault. That's what the internet has kind of taught us to do. So good question, Alex. All right, from All Media Reviews, blogspot.com. I'd love to hear your reaction and response opinion about a friend of mine's take on Uriah Heep. He basically says Uriah Heep are a poor man's Deep Purple. Do you agree with this in any way? And likely, if not, what would you say to him if he said or asked for your response about it? Okay, well, first of all, that's not his, I guarantee you that's not his original thought process or idea, because that's been said for decades, starting back in the early 70s. I think that, I forget who the reviewer was, that made fun of Heep's first couple albums and that basically said they're a poor man's Deep Purple. Okay, listen. They came out basically around the same time. I think Purple was around for like maybe 2 years before Heep, maybe a year and a half, but that Heep formula was already percolating in a couple other bands before Heep actually came together in late '69 and released their first album in 1970. So honestly, they're contemporaries. I mean, let's just be real about it. And really the only similarities here, the only similarities between the two bands is the heavy guitar and organ formula. That's it. Because otherwise, there's really not a lot of similarities between Uriah Heep and Deep Purple. All right? Purple were more bluesy, at times a little more jazzy, at times a little bit more heavy and metallic, whereas Heep definitely had more of a prog edge, in my opinion, definitely more of a psychedelic edge. Lyrically, they were very different. Purple was singing about, women and boozing and all such a strange tales from the road and stuff like that, where Heep were singing about, a lot of fantasy-themed things. And honestly, like I said, other than that heavy Hammond organ, and even the guitar work is completely different. I mean, Ritchie Blackmore and Mick Box, completely different from each other. Completely. So, I never got the poor man's Deep Purple. I honestly, again, other than the Hammond organ, the presence of the Hammond organ, there's nothing similar about those two bands at all. David Byron's vocals compared to Gillan or even, Coverdale and Hughes, not alike at all. So, I don't know. I don't agree with it, All Media, so if I was to talk to your friend, I would tell him or her the exact same thing. From Scalagrimmer Kevoltzelson. Hi, Pete. I hope this has not been asked yet. I'd like to know your thoughts on the so-called loudness war. Have you ever listened to a CD and thought that its overall volume was much too loud and had no dynamic range? For some CD collectors, this seems to be a huge problem with newer CD reissues. Thank you, and happy Easter to you and your family. Obviously, Easter was a week ago. Thank you, Scalagrimmer. All right, so here's my take on this whole thing. I think the folks who listen to CDs through headphones a lot complain about this issue. I don't really have an issue with it because I very rarely listen to CDs on headphones. The only time I really listen to music on headphones is on my iPod when I'm at the gym, or maybe I'm traveling like on a train or a plane or something like that. I happen to be listening to music. I actually had a lot of issues with a lot of the early CD editions, and we're talking like late 80s, early mid 90s. I mean, there were a lot of CDs that came out of like classic albums where the volume level, the output level of the tracks was so low. Musically, it made them perfectly balanced, all that kind of stuff, but man, so low that you had to like crank your whatever you were listening on full blast to really kind of hear it. So a lot of CD companies, and a lot of the mastering and remastering, they tried to overcompensate by that by, really cranking up the volume, adding the compression, all that kind of stuff. So what you hear is this kind of wall of sound, but to a lot of people, especially those who are listening on headphones, it's noise, right? And lack of a dynamic range. So it depends on really how you're listening to stuff. Like I said, I don't sit with headphones trying to hear every little nuance and what have you. Occasionally I'll put on something on my home, not occasionally, but every so often I'll put on my home theater system through the Blu-ray, through the sound bar and the surround speakers, And, you know, that's where you really kind of want to sit and hear. But for the most part, most of my listening is done. I don't just very rarely just sit, other than when I'm reviewing stuff. I don't just kind of sit and listen. I put something on and I'm doing something else, or I'm in the car driving and I'm listening, but I'm kind of thinking about where I'm going and that sort of thing. So I get it. I mean, I have heard some, especially some metal stuff where, you know, you pop that CD on and it's pretty harsh. Okay. And it's like they were going for that. And that, and you know, some people really dig that. Some people like the kind of quieter, more nuanced, more dynamic thing. It's all a matter of preference. I think it's all a matter of how you like to listen to your music. From Bonalong, metal as a genre. Metal as a genre has so many subgenres like speed, doom, death, symphonic, power, progressive, thrash. Is it possible for you to describe the characteristics of some, if not all, of these metal subgenres? I'm familiar with progressive rock subgenres, but not metal. Thanks, Pete. And I'm going to tell you, there was another question that asked from another viewer who asked, what are my favorites of some of these subgenres? So, okay, so let's kind of tackle them one at a time. So speed metal and thrash almost kind of go hand in hand. So speed metal takes like the classic metal, like late 70s, early 80s metal sound, and just adds like double bass drumming and, you know, fast picked riffs and really, really speedy guitar solos, at times technical guitar solos. Speed metal also, a lot of bands took to higher register vocal approaches. Okay, thrash is very similar. Okay, thrash is, I would say, can be as fast as speed metal, but it's more technical. Okay. A lot of emphasis on double bass drumming, okay? A lot of time tempo changes and things like that, okay? Complex rhythms, lengthier solos, kind of technical solos using like a lot of whammy bar and sweep picking and things like that. Thrash also at times employed more of a gruff vocal approach. There were some thrash bands that had, you know, high-pitched vocals, but more often than not, the thrash bands started to do more of like a mid-range, kind of throatier vocal style. All right? I'm a big thrash fan. There's a lot of really good challenging music in a lot of the classic thrash albums from the day. Power metal, in a lot of ways, kind of employed some of the speed metal format, but the music was definitely slowed down a bit more epic, okay? A lot of power metal bands have very strong singers, can employ like an operatic kind of tone. A lot of the lyrical content for power metal takes on like fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, and sci-fi lyrical content. Okay, there's also kind of a lot of power metal bands employ kind of like this whole very upbeat kind of, you know, Game of Thrones type of thing. Just think of like the people in Game of Thrones having a good time, listening to some tunes, drinking a big pint of mead or whatever, and that whole kind of happy-go-lucky, you know, hi-ho type of thing. So symphonic metal, very similar to power metal, can be complex at times like progressive metal, but huge emphasis on keyboards, orchestrations, big multi-track vocals and choruses and choirs and that sort of thing. So if you're a prog guy, all right, and you don't mind a little bit of aggressiveness in your music and you kind of like metal a little bit, but you have a love for lots of keyboards, symphonic metal is the way to go. I mean, it's just, you know, the bands like Camelot and Nightwish. I mean, come on, so much keyboards there. Death metal. So death metal basically took like kind of the early thrash and classic metal and just amped up the ferocity, added growling death metal vocals, sometimes mixed with clean vocals, breakdowns, and, you know, sometimes technical guitar solos, just overall brutal, punishing metal that not for everybody, all right? But really potent stuff. A lot of great death metal bands out there. So if you like and what's really interesting is, you know, some death metal bands go for that kind of like total brutality where it's just like, you know, juggernaut, nonstop blasting, you know, blast beats with the drums. So it's just kind of this type of thing, chugging guitar riffs and stuff like that. But some of them take like the classic metal framework from like the early 80s, but just add the death metal vocals on top, which is kind of like what Arch Enemy has always done. What else have I not? So might as well do black metal while we're at. So black metal is a form of metal that kind of got its birth in the 80s with bands like Hellhammer and Celtic Frost and Bathory, maybe a little bit of Venom, a little bit of early Slayer. But then as the late 80s and early 90s came around, kind of in Norway, what happened is you got all these metal musicians who started, and again, a lot of them were Kiss fans, right? But were also into Venom and bands like that. And they started using the corpse paint, and they started taking that kind of like that early death metal sound, but even faster. So they mix like speed metal into it with, like, instead of doing growls, they did like these high pitched like rasps and screams and things like that. So completely different sound. And a lot of them also incorporated prog rock keyboards and, with a lot of blast beats on the drums, and the riffs, instead of like slower, thick chords and whatever, it's a lot of really fast tremolo picked riffs. So the music kind of took on this kind of fast, icy, cold kind of feel to it. All right. A lot of good black metal bands out there too, but again, not for everybody. Some people can't handle the vocals, but there's some really good kind of progressive, symphonic, and atmospheric black metal bands that take that framework, but add tons of keyboards and orchestrations and kind of chilling atmosphere and what have you. Those are pretty cool. Doom could be, I love thrash, I love progressive metal a lot, I like power metal, I like death and black. I mean, I like all these subgenres. I have a real love for Doom because Doom kind of took its birth from Black Sabbath, right? And I'm a huge Sabbath fan, so I love Doom. So basically, if you like Sabbath, if you like early Pentagram, so we'll throw out there, Saint Vitus and Candlemass and Cathedral and, Down, then you could talk about Stoner. Stoner is kind of like a more modern take on Doom, adding some blues rock elements. But, Doom just... In most cases, Doom has just got big, fat, fuzz-drenched riffs, slow, wah-wah guitar solos, sometimes lengthy guitar solos. Vocals could be all over the map, could be high-pitched, could be more of a mid-range, more of a bluesy thing, a gruff thing. Some Doom bands have like a kind of like a death metal growl. Some death metal bands do like these kind of epic, long tracks that, Funeral Doom, like 20-minute long songs. There's a really just kind of ponderous stuff, but a lot of really good stuff in the metal genre. And, it's all over the map. There's so many different styles, and they're all kind of, different from each other. A lot of great bands. So, bottom line, there's a lot for you to explore. If you want some suggestions, let me know. Just send me a message through Facebook, whatever. I'm happy to give you some suggestions on any of these. So next question from Earl Joy. Pete, could you compare and comment on the following vocalists? Ronnie James Dio, Brad Delp, David Coverdale, and Ian Gillan. What are their strengths and weaknesses, and which do you prefer? Well, I love all of them. Ronnie, may he rest in peace. God, two of these guys are no longer with us. Ronnie was an amazing storyteller. He had an amazing presence on stage. He had a great voice. I mean, that's number one, right? And despite the fact that he was like a small little guy, and Ronnie was like, he had a unique look to him, right? That guy could sing with the best of them, and it's just something about Ronnie's voice. It just kind of took you through the song to new lands and out into space, and you're just along for the ride with him. And I always loved him. As far as his weaknesses go, I honestly don't think Ronnie had any weaknesses at all. I think he's one of the most perfect vocalists ever out there. Brad Delp, another guy, man. That guy, what a range he had early on. And I think that, and I never saw Brad live. I didn't get to see Boston until much later on after he had passed away. But I think Brad on album, between his lead vocals and all the backing vocal tracks with him and the rest of the band, that was like one of the biggest walls of sound ever from a vocal perspective. I've heard lots of live recordings of Boston back in the day and like in the 80s, where I think he still sounded very good live, but it was like not quite as strong as on album. But the guy was still an amazing, amazing singer. It's really, and very unique. Nobody has ever sounded like Brad Delp. Very unique style. David Coverdale. I love Coverdale. I'm a huge fan. Right here, you got four of my favorite vocalists. In fact, three of them are my top three. Okay, Coverdale. Early on, Coverdale just had that kind of sultry, smoky, bluesy, like hard rock god vocal style. And I absolutely have adored Coverdale all throughout the years. I mean, he's lost a bit of years. I mean, he admits it. We know it. He can't do the screaming thing anymore, obviously, and he's had to kind of dial things way back a notch. And he sounds like a mid-60s-year-old guy now. But I always loved his ability to kind of, if you want to call him sexy, Coverdale, some of Coverdale's vocal styles. He could do the power thing, right? But then he could kind of dial it back and get like a sexy bluesy tone, which I think was really, really cool. Ian Gillan, another guy, probably my favorite vocalist of all time. Gillan back in the day was the man. Not only could he do kind of a whimsical little passage, he could do that kind of whispering type of thing as well. And then he could go out front and he could scream to the heavens and, like glass would break. In recent years, Ian also has lost a lot. He can't do any of the screaming anymore. He sounds like a, near 70-year-old guy trying to sing his best, and he does. When he's just doing the kind of older British gentleman kind of vocal style, he's fine, right? It's when he's trying to replicate what he did back in the glory days where you're oh, man, he's lost a bit. But I love all these guys. And I think that each one of them has their own strengths and weaknesses. Gillan, another guy who could tell a really good story, but a different kind of story from Ronnie, right? They're both storytellers, but different. So great singers, great question. Thanks for it. From Johnny Perro, we're going to stick on Dio here. I saw your top 10 on Ronnie James Dio. You praise him a lot, and he earns that. But I've never heard you talk about Hearing Aid, especially the song Stars. I mean, come on, Pete, a few of the best metal singers ever. Guitar shredding par excellence. I know it's a song for charity, but in fact, it's just a hell of a song. Yeah, hell yeah, it is. I was huge into the Hearing Aid thing when it came out because this, mid-'80s, right? Metal is huge. I'm huge into it. And here they do this charity thing kind of hot on the heels of We Are the World and, Live Aid and all that kind of stuff. Let's let the metal guys do a thing. And I had that EP, and I think the Stars song is awesome. And God bless Ronnie for putting that all together. He had a lot of talent on there. Not all of them worked well together. The extended cut with all the lengthy guitar solos is fun for what it is, and some are better than others. I think, Neil Schon stands out on there. Yngwie I thought did pretty good. Who else? Vivian Campbell. I'm trying to think of who else. George Lynch was very good on there. I thought Neil Schon was probably the best out of all of them. Ironically, not really a metal guy, right? But it's just very, very cool to see Halford and Dio and all these guys there together. It's just Dee Snider and the whole 9 yards. Very cool, and I almost wish we could see something like that again. All right, from Gene Kirsten. Great video, Pete, as usual. I like the new format. Question. We all know that the big three, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and Deep Purple, are widely known as the forebearers of hard rock heavy metal. Where does that leave The Who? Equally as iconic as the others, equally as dynamic, and equally as respected. Is their music not heavy enough? Pete Townsend might not be as well respected as the guitarist as the other three, but Entwistle, Moon, and Roger Daltrey are certainly among the tops in their respected fields. Your opinions, please. Yeah, I mean, The Who are... you have the originators of the big three of and you probably should say four because Heep is in there as well. The big four of hard rock and metal, Zeppelin, Sabbath, Purple, and Heep. But then there's the big three of rock, and we call them the British Invasion. But come on, these were the guys. I mean, the Stones, the Beatles, and the Who were as important to rock and roll as anybody. So the Who were never heavy enough as those other bands. I don't believe. They had their moments. And Townsend might not be the lead guitar virtuoso as any of those other dudes, but great guitarist in his own, one of the best rhythm guitar players ever. Okay? So I think the Who get plenty of respect. They just don't fit into that category. However, when I always think of the big rock and roll bands, the most important rock and roll bands of all time, they're in the top three. And they happen to be all British, right? In fact, every band we just mentioned are all British bands. Go figure, right? Some of the most important bands in rock and roll and hard rock ever. The Beatles, the Stones, the Who, Zeppelin, Sabbath, Purple, and Uriah Heep. Okay? I mean, they're all British. What does that tell you, right? From David M. When you listen to music, not for reviews, but when you are just listening to music, do you have it on shuffle or do you listen to the disc straight through? So David says, when I'm at work, I have my music on shuffle. In my car, I listen to things straight through. When it is a hot summer day, I will listen to Santana, the Rippington, Spyro Gyra, Early Journey, etc. When I exercise, I have to pull out the metal. I almost never, ever listen to shuffle. I'm sorry. I'm an album guy. I like to listen to stuff from start to finish. That's just the way I am. My wife does the shuffle thing. It drives me crazy. Sometimes we'll be hanging out and she'll go to Spotify. We've got like the Amazon Echo thing in the dining room, and she'll be like, Alexa, play, Lynyrd Skynyrd or something like that. I hope it doesn't hear me now downstairs. And when you do that, it's just going to, and the first song that always gets played is Sweet Home Alabama. Then it'll play Free Bird. Then it'll play Give Me Two Step. And I'm just like, don't do that. Don't just say the name of the band and, tell it to play, because it's just going to be a shuffle of the most popular songs. So when I do that, I say, Alexa, don't want her to hear, play, Second Helping or whatever the album might be. And that's just the way I am. Even on my iPod, when I go to the gym, on my way to the gym, I have already thought about which album I want to listen to when I'm working out every day. It's very rare that I walk into the gym, put my stuff down, get my workout gloves on, and go to the iPod and say, what the fuck do I want to listen to today? All right, I almost never do that. I usually, when I am walking out of my car into the gym, I already know exactly what I'm going to listen to. So yeah, I don't do the shuffle. Just don't like it. I like to hear what I like to hear. That's just me. I know I'm in the minority though. A lot of people love the shuffle thing. From T-Dog. Hi Pete, if Led Zepp, Deep Purple, and Sabbath hadn't existed, which bands would we now be talking about as the big three of early heavy metal, or would metal as we know it not have evolved at all? Thanks. I mean, that's a great question. Who knows? We still had Cream and we still had Jimmy. All right? We still had The Who. We had Heep. I still think we would have had, if there was no Sabbath, that would have been a game changer. Because I think a lot of bands came in Sabbath's wake and went for that style of kind of like, brutally heavy and dark and, taking blues rock to the next level. That would have changed things a lot. But I think if you take those three out of the equation, like I said, we still had Cream. And there were bands, and let's face it, Sabbath probably also learned a lot from Cream, as did all these bands actually. And Hendrix, right? Hendrix was kind of heavy at times, and you had The Who. So I think we still would have had heavy metal, but it would have been a little different. It would have been a lot different probably, but I think maybe not as metallic. That's the key. Would there have been other metallic bands had Zepp, Purple, and Sabbath not come into play? It's a good question, because Cream, Hendrix, The Who, Heep, not very metallic bands, right? Not huge on, Jimmy to an extent, Cream to, Distortion and Fuzz and all that kind of stuff. But those other three bands kind of took things to another level. And, and Purple and then Heep, combined like that kind of virtuosity thing, especially Purple, and with the Hammond and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think the landscape would have been different. I think we still would have had heavy music, but would we have had Judas Priest as we knew them to be in 75, 76, 77, were it not for Deep Purple and Sabbath? There's a lot of bands you think of who came like just after them. How would they have said, would we have had Pentagram had there been no Sabbath? I mean, Pentagram were basically a blues band early on, right? So might have been a lot different. From Terry Wood. Hey, Pete, I'm sure you've touched on this before, but I'd be interested in your 10 Desert Island studio albums. I kind of haven't. I did like important. Yeah, I really have not. It's something I have in the works, but and you threw me for a loop when you said studio albums, because I put this list together and then I had a couple live albums. I was like, I can't do that. So Deep Purple and Rock, Whitesnake, 1987, Rainbow Rising, Black Sabbath Volume 4, Led Zeppelin Physical Graffiti, UFO Obsession, Black Sabbath Heaven and Hell, Uriah Heep Look at Yourself, Yes, Close to the Edge, and Genesis Foxtrot. That's what I'm going to go with today. That's what I'm going to take with me today. That list could change, though, at any time. From Ninja Badger. Hi, Pete. As I posted a 2-question submission last week, I didn't get selected. A lot of people didn't get selected. Don't take it personally. I'll redo them over 2 weeks to keep it down to 1. So the first was, what are your thoughts on Article 13 recently passed by the EU? This piece of legislation, if spreading overseas to America and elsewhere, as it's widely believed it will seriously affect, if not shut down, channels such as yours dealing with music. Well, from my understanding, this new Article 13 is they're trying to get people on YouTube and various other video channels to stop posting music copyrighted and owned by other artists and things like that. As you know, I don't play any music on this channel. All I do is talk about stuff. I've even heard that they are thinking about maybe, people who were doing like guitar instruction videos of certain songs and things. They're going to try and stop that. I don't know. Like I said, the way they're trying to censor everything these days, it would not surprise me. Or they want everybody to pay for stuff. It's gotten, considering that so much music is available for free on the internet and the artists aren't getting shit based on what I just talked about before, I find it almost ludicrous that they're trying to do this. But Ninja Badger is insinuating that my channel might get shut down. I mean, all I'm doing is talking here. I'm not playing any music. I'm talking about bands, talking about music. I'm not playing, if I can't even do this, then the world is in a sad place, people. All right. Next question from Rick Labont. Pete, have you ever bought a CD out of curiosity from what could be defined as a supergroup and was disappointed that it was not as good as you would thought? On paper, the group may have stellar musicians with respectful careers as songwriters, but the album did not deliver to your expectations. Yeah, I mean, there's been a bunch of them over the years that I was either excited about or mildly interested, and then in some cases it was terrible, or in some cases it just really didn't live up to much, like Ginger Baker's Air Force is a really early supergroup. Again, I was too young when that first came out, but I've gone after them in recent years, and I'm like, it's really not that good. Beck, Bogart, and Appice, or Appice. Jeff Beck, Neil Bogart, and Carmen Appice, or Appice, however the hell he says his name. Him and his brother both pronounce their names differently, which is crazy. That's good. I like that album, but man, that should have been better. And a couple of these fall into that category of good, but should have been a lot better. Beck, Bogart, and Appice should have been one of the greatest albums ever with the talent of those three guys. I think the thing that suffered there is they should have brought in a singer. It should have been Beck, Bogart, Appice, and someone else who had a really strong... Could you imagine, like Steve Marriott singing for that band? As it was, I think all three of them took turns singing, and none of them are great singers, and it suffers a little bit from that. The songs are good, but man, with a powerhouse singer, that band and album would have been enormous. They were big enough as it was, but just never really... It's good. Should have been better. The Firm is another one. The Firm should have been awesome. As it was pretty good. Jimmy Page and Paul Rodgers, right? Tony Franklin, Chris Slade. I mean, that's on paper a great band. And those two albums are good. Should have been better, I thought. That should have been the huge band of the 80s. GTR, again, good album, solid, not great. You got Hackett and Howe in the same band together. Come on, that should have been like incredible. And there just wasn't enough guitar work in it for me. I mean, come on, you called GTR, you got two of the most respected guitar players in prog rock, and you got an album that was kind of like a good 80s kind of pop album with little bits of prog thrown in. Should have been a lot of prog thrown in. Contraband, kind of late 80s, early 90s supergroup with Schenker and a bunch of other people. That's not very good at all. I never liked A Perfect Circle. I tried. I always liked Tool. You had a bunch of other guys from other bands. It just didn't really do a lot for me. Oysterhead, okay. That's another kind of 90s supergroup. You got Trey Anastasia from Fish. That wasn't very good. Just never really dug it. No. Velvet Revolver, I didn't like a lot of those bands anyway. Come on, you put that talent together, should have been decent. Really wasn't. Hell Yeah, didn't like that at all. Super Heavy with the Mick Jagger and a bunch of other people. I was so excited when that came out, and I don't think I've listened to it since a month after I bought it. And that recent one, Gizmodrome with Adrian Belew and Stuart Copeland, and that is awful, terrible. If there's anybody out there who likes that, I highly question why. Ugh. From Darkska. Building on the Me Too question you answered last week, do you feel that artists should take positions regarding their past or ongoing history? Or should their personality and music stand on its own outside of any behavior? No, you're all responsible for your own actions. All right? So if they want to kind of beat the storm, which some of them may want to, come out and say that you did wrong back in the day. All right, because what usually happens is people that, we'll keep it under the rug, nobody's going to say anything, and then something comes out, and then they're like, oh, crap, and then that's it, right? So it's kind of like the steroids thing with baseball. All those guys that kind of came out and admitted it, time was a little, people forgive, all right? People are forgiving. Initially, they're like, and hey, they may not get into the Baseball Hall of Fame, but they admitted it, and people forgive them. It's the baseball players who have failed. There's all this documentation that they probably did steroids, okay, and they're just holding. I didn't do anything. I'm innocent, and it was obvious it was. People don't forget that, okay. So it's the same thing with rock stars and what have you. It's like if you were a piece of shit back in the day, you know what? You're all old. They're all older now. They're all like in their 60s and 70s. You know what? Admits. You know what? When I was 25 years old, I wasn't so good around women, okay? And I'm really sorry for it. It kind of was the times, and I apologize, all that kind of stuff. So I don't think anybody is innocent and should, it doesn't matter how great someone is, how great their music was, whether they were, a model citizen to the public. If behind the scenes they were a piece of garbage, you gotta take your responsibility for that. From ASDH85224, I would like to comment on song fade-outs. Definitely one of my pet peeves, especially songs that seem to fade out too early during a great solo, etc. I always thought that it was lazy for a band to fade out to a great song. Are there any songs that you feel would have been better without the dreaded fade-out, like Comfortably Numb, Sultans of Swing, Runaway, blah, 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 blah. They list a whole bunch of them. Rather than me list songs, because there's a lot of them, I'm just going to tell you I don't like fade-outs either. I think they're lame. End the song on a high note. Okay, and then what happens? You're going to go play that song live now. Now you got to come up with something. All right, just fade outs, no good. How many times do you hear like a great song that has a cool ending and an awesome guitar solo, and all of a sudden it just peters out, and the guy's still going. I'm like, I want to hear the rest. I want to hear the band kind of put a stamp on it, finish it up. From Tim Marciniak, hey Pete, have you ever considered putting together a streaming music channel on the Sea of Tranquility site, playing all the stuff you talk about here on YouTube? I would listen every day. I'm sure you would. I would like to too. Unfortunately, I've thought about potentially somewhere down the road doing like an internet radio show or radio station, something like that. I really dig what my buddy Jeff Young is doing on the Music Without Boundaries thing, and I love guesting on that. And could you imagine being, him and I doing that full time? That's our day job, right? But unfortunately, got to get paid for that, and there's no money in doing that. So maybe at some point, when I'm nearing the end of my working career and want to just kind of retire and do things I would love to. How cool would that be? To have like a talk show like this and be able to play music all day long, all right? But it doesn't pay the bills. That's the problem. So, great idea. I have thought of it. So we'll see what the future holds, right? From me, Leaf Siklowski. I like the recent question on great albums of progressive rock from 78 and 79, and I was hoping that you can answer a similar question regarding to hard rock. Hard rock was going strong in 81 with Moving Pictures by Rush, Allied Forces by Triumph, Nature of the Beast by April Wine, all Canadian bands I noticed. By the end of the decade, great hard rock albums were harder to find. Are there any hard rock albums that came out in 89 and 90 that you consider worth revisiting? Hell yeah. So there's a lot that are like, they're hard rock, border on metal. So Sabbath's Headless Cross, the Cult, Sonic Temple, Alice Cooper's Trash, Skid Row's self-titled debut, very good. Whitesnake's Slip of the Tongue, I know they get some shit from a lot of people, but I like it a lot. Blue Murder's self-titled debut is awesome. Badlands' self-titled debut was awesome. I highly recommend those two, probably the first ones to investigate out of this list. TNT Intuition, Gary Moore's After the War, Gutter Ballet by Savatage, Tesla's The Great Radio Controversy, Damn Yankees' self-titled debut. What else we got here? Soundgarden's Louder Than Love, Fate's Warning, Perfect Symmetry, Dream Theater, When Dream and Day Unite, King's X, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, Candlemass, Tales of Creation. There you got enough to investigate. A lot of good stuff there. From LTW, Whitesnake is putting out a new album on May 10th. That's right, I can't wait. Would you talk about the new album, maybe some of the songs and the differences from past albums? Have you or are you going to the concert? I am excited about the new music. All right, so I've only heard the 3 songs they played. It doesn't come out till May 10th, so we got a couple more weeks. The first single that I heard, Shut Up and Kiss Me, I didn't like at all. And it's very rare for me to say I don't like a Whitesnake song, because as you guys know, I'm a huge fan. I just really don't like that tune at all. It's kind of like sophomoric and silly, and it just took me back to an era in the 80s where Whitesnake was always accused of being a hair metal band. They really weren't, but that is totally like a cheesy hair metal tune. And I didn't like it at all. I'm like, oh God, I hope the rest of the album is not like this. Thankfully, they've released 2 other songs in the last couple of weeks that are much better, and I forget the titles. The second one was good. The third one was really good. So hopefully, and I like Whitesnake's last couple studio albums. I like them a lot. So I'm hoping it's really good. I'm excited to hear Joel Hoekstra and Reb tearing it up on original music because they both appeared together on the Deep Purple tribute, the Purple album. But I want to hear, the two of those guys on some new original music. So I'm excited to hear the rest of it. So I'm waiting for it. As for the tour, they're only playing one place in my area. And it's all the way down in Jersey at Starland Ballroom in Sayreville, New Jersey. And it's a haul for me. And it's not a good day of the week for me. And they're not playing anywhere else. Because last bunch of tours, they've been not far from me and I've gone to see them. But I did see them last summer, which was really cool. So I don't think I'm going to get to see them this year unless they come around again. And our last question of the day from Professor Whiskey Breath. Hey, Pete, this question is regarding record producers and particularly the band Rush. Most longtime fans would assert that Terry Brown was the best person to work with Rush. I can understand bands wanting to branch out, but when you have relationships in place that are working, why change? Do you think Rush's career would have been more consistent record-wise if they had continued to work with Terry? And if you have time to consider it, what are some of your favorite producers in the prog genre? All right, so here's the deal. Terry was perfect for what Rush were doing at that time. But as the 80s kind of started to get going, Rush wanted to change their sound a bit. They wanted to become more modern, incorporate a lot of new techniques and technologies, a lot of synths and all that kind of stuff, go for more, commercial types of song structures and things like that. And that maybe wasn't Terry Brown's strong point, right? And I think, now who knows if Terry would have worked out for them still doing the things that they wanted to do. I just think that, and would I have liked to have seen them continue on with Terry? Yeah, sure. But that's not what the band had in mind, right? So they had to move on. And it's changed with the times, right? So we can lament all we want that we preferred all the Rush albums that Terry was involved. And those are but they were kind of a different band then, right? They were a little younger. They were still kind of finding their way and experimented a lot of things. And then the 80s changed a lot of bands. I mean, we kind of talked about it on last week's show. The 80s changed a lot of bands. And bands that, had a certain style in the 70s, then all of a sudden the 80s came and, music changed. And a lot of bands changed with it. So what are you going to do? Some of my favorite prog producers from the 70s or that era, Bob Ezrin, I think, is awesome. He's still awesome. I think great producer. Todd Rundgren, always like what he's done. Eddie Offord, I mean, come on, those Yes albums. Alan Parsons, those Alan Parsons Project albums are phenomenal from a sonic perspective. Roy Thomas Baker, who did all that great stuff with Queen. Eddie Kramer, he's worked with everybody. Okay. Tom Dowd, Glyn Johns, I should say. I always want to say Glyn Johns. Tony Visconti, all right. Did a lot of great stuff in the early 70s. Jeff Lynne, produced all those great ELO albums. Brian Eno, George Martin, just to name a few there. Some really good producers back in the day who were working with a lot of the prog and classic rock or, regular rock guys and hard rock bands and stuff like that. A lot of great producers back then. So that's all we got for today. All right, that's the last one. So visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're here on the mighty YouTube. We got, what do we got coming up? We got top 10 songs with Kiss coming up this weekend with my buddy Jack Toledano. Big Kiss fan. We know each other 35 years, and we've always been Kiss fans together, so who better to have on that show than him? And next week, all sorts of stuff coming up, so just go check out the recent video I posted that talks about a lot of the things that are happening on the channel. You can see what's in the pipeline, and till next time, we'll see you again real soon, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.